my second hero, I'm going to be talking about a guy named Lucien Wolf. And this is another hero who was kind of before the war, but I think he's important, and there are a lot of other people like him who were really important, and I'd like to spend a little time talking about. So the background for this goes all the way back to a series of documents which you may or may not have heard of, called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, or the Protocols. There are a bunch of different names, and it's a collection of documents that are supposedly written by Jewish leaders on their plans to take over the world. So, the Protocols. What were they? There were some forged letters in there. There were some chapters of books that were fiction, and these chapters had been published and republished, and eventually they were published as truth based on fiction, and then they were published as truth, and nobody knows for certain who took all of these different anti-Semitic writings and put them together into one book, but at some point in the late 19th century, somebody got all of these anti-Semitic writings together and published it. It was translated into English in like 1906, but before that it had been in other languages. It's like a conglomeration of a bunch of different anti-Semitic writings that had been published up to that point. And this Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion was circulated throughout the world. It was in America, it was in all over Europe. It was a big part of Hitler's anti-Semitism. I believe it was required reading in the German schools during World War II because there was just this very strong anti-Semitic feel. Alright, so the Protocols, these documents, were being sold in the Casino of Bern, Switzerland, which is the capital of Switzerland, in 1933. So this led to a trial called the Bern trial because the accusation was that these people who were selling the protocol were convicted of violating a statute that said that you couldn't circulate or sell anything that was immoral, obscene, or brutalizing. And so that's what the violation was. And so there was this trial, and basically I want to read you a quote from the judge, Judge Walter Meyer, who I really admire, and honestly he could have been my hero today too. He says, "I hope the time will come when nobody will be able to understand how in 1935 nearly a dozen sane and responsible men were able for 2 weeks to mock the intellect of the Bern court discussing the authenticity of the so-called protocols. The very protocols that, harmful as they have been and will be, are nothing but laughable nonsense." Amen? Yeah. So at this trial, testifying was our man Lucien Wolf. Let's jump back a little bit and take a look at Lucien Wolf for a second. He was born in 1857. He was British, and he was a journalist. His career in journalism started as early as like 17, and he wrote on a bunch of different things. He was kind of specialized in like foreign affairs, diplomacy. There was an outbreak of anti-Jewish pogroms in Russia that started in like 1881, and that kind of sparked his interest, and he started writing a lot about Jewish affairs, about Russia, all of that. And so he wrote a lot with that slant. During the 1920s, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. So he testified at the Bern trials in Switzerland. He was also part of the Anglo-Jewish delegation to the Paris Peace Conference, and that was in 1919, where they were drafting the Treaty of Versailles. I want to read to you a few of just his publications. He wrote articles, he wrote books, he wrote a ton of stuff. Alright, so he wrote a bunch of articles, but among them were, in 1920, The Myth of the Jewish Menace in World Affairs, and The Jewish Boogie and the Forged Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And those were both kind of proving that there was no authenticity behind the protocols. And then some books he wrote were The Myth of the Jewish Menace in the World Affairs, The Truth About the Forged Protocols of the Elders of Zion in 1920, and The Myth of the Jewish Menace in World Affairs, or The Truth About the Forged Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So he wrote those books in addition to articles, and he wrote a ton of other stuff, but those are just the ones focusing on the protocols, and he kind of shot the protocols down. He was like, listen, you guys, these are forged and untrue and honestly just wrong. Yeah, so that's all I have for you about Lucien Wolf and the protocols, but